Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now on our 47th episode of 2024. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor for Five for Breakfast. Well, exciting times here in Washington, D.C. First, I'd like to congratulate our good friend Vineeth Iyengar and the state of Louisiana for being the first state to submit their final NTI BEAD proposal, in which they have awarded 96% of its broadband service locations to fiber. That's 96 fiber. That's great. Fantastic start to building our nation's critical infrastructure. I'd also like to congratulate NTI for now having the initial BEAD proposals approved for all 56 states and territories with the recent approval of Texas' $3.3 billion BEAD program. So we're now fully on our way. On Sunday night, President-elect Trump named Brendan Carr to be nominated as the next chair of the FCC. Trump also nominated Howard Lutnick, the co-chair of his transition team, for Secretary of Commerce. So things are moving very quickly here in D.C., which is great because we don't want any delays. Congress continues to look for a pathway forward to fund the government, and the 30-day shutdown clock has officially started. Senate Agriculture Committee Chair Stabenow released a draft farm bill on Monday that would codify a 100 by 100 requirement for the RUS Reconnect program. We expect some negotiations will be ongoing to reach bipartisan support. And up next in the Fiber Broadband Association, we have our premier member meeting in Florida on December 9th and 10th. We'll be discussing and setting our strategy for 2025. And last week, we released our regional Fiber Connect schedule for 2025, and the exhibits and sponsorships of events are nearly already sold out. We've seen a tremendous amount of excitement for our 2025 regional lineup, and we'll be starting in San Antonio in February, Philadelphia in March, and then we'll do Fiber Day on the Hill in April. Will be our big Fiber Connect 2025 annual conference will be in Nashville in June 1st to 4th. Then we'll be in Anchorage, July, Toronto in August, and Scottsdale, October, and then wrap up in Kansas City in November. And then our premier member meeting will be in Palm Springs in December. And that brings us to today's Five for Breakfast. Our guests today are Primora Sanyal and Coleman Brazilian from the Brattle Group, who's going to be sharing their latest national economic impact study, the economic impact of fiber deployment. But before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce David Norris from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, please keep in mind all participants are in listen-only mode. To ask a question, please type it into the question box, which is located within the control panel on the side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's presentation. This session is being recorded and will be available on the FBA website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. And at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate your input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary to get us started. Gary?
Thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was our good friend, Mark Bridger from Continuum Capital, and the Fiber Broadband Association's own Vice President of Workforce Development, Debbie Kish, who shared their latest national workforce research study, FBA PCA workforce study, who will get the work done as BEAD money begins to flow. The study provides the broadband workforce needs by state and the aggregate nationwide requirements. So if you missed the session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guests are Primora Sanyal and Coleman Brazilian from the Brattle Group, who will be sharing their latest national economic impact study, the economic impact of fiber deployment. Dr. Coleman Brazilian is a partner at the Brattle Group's DC office and a co-lead on Brattle's IP practice. He's an economic expert with much of his practice focused in regulation, strategy, and valuation in the wireless, wireline, and video sectors. Coleman frequently advises regulatory and legislative bodies, including the FCC and Congress. And prior to joining Brattle, Dr. Brazilian was the vice president at an international economic and strategy consulting firm. He's also served as a principal analyst at Microelectronics and Financial Studies Division of the Congressional Budget Office. Dr. Pramoro Sanyal is a partner at the Brattle Group's DC office and co-lead in Brattle's telecom and media entertainment practice. She's a telecommunications industry expert specializing in spectrum policy, auctions, broadband competition, regulation, consumer protection, and intellectual property matters. Pamara frequently advises clients on FCC regulatory issues in fixed and mobile broadband, spectrum auctions, spectrum value, spectrum availability. And prior to joining Brattle, she was the chief economist at the FCC's Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. And prior to serving at the FCC, Pamara was an assistant professor at Brandeis University, where she held joint positions in economic department and international business school. So welcome, Coleman and Pamara. And for audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work those into the discussion. With that, I will turn things over to Coleman and Pamara.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. So for everyone attending the webinar today, thank you for your time. We will sort of present a few slides to walk through the study, and then we'll throw it open, and Gary will sort of lead the Q&A session. Coleman and I will tag team this. David, for the next slide, please. For a quick background and overview, this is an economic study that looks at the impact of fiber, and we'll walk through why this study is a little different from what usually other studies do. So with a quick background and overview, we are going to go into sort of the economics behind why we think there is fiber underinvestment and explain that a bit. And after that, we are going to talk about really the nitty-gritty details of the study, about how we got the numbers that we got, what are the sectors, where is the value increase coming from, and then round it out with some policy recommendations. Next slide, please, David. So for a very quick background and overview, I'm probably preaching to the choir here about why fiber deployment is important to the US economy, but generally, fiber is a very critical infrastructure technology, and it is not just limited to providing fiber broadband. It's very important for backhaul, which means it is also important for advances in 5G and all other sort of 6G and other generation technologies in wireless that we'll be seeing, also important for fixed wireless. Therefore, fiber is sort of a long-term, a catalyst for a long-term economic engine. What do we find? Just to leave you with a teaser before we explain how we get there, we find that if fiber is deployed to all the fiber unserved households, then we can expect to generate at least $3.2 trillion of value. Seems large at the outset, but we are going to break it down for you to explain how we got there. One thing that's important to keep in mind about this study is this study was primarily done to see the incremental effect of fiber over other wired high-speed technologies such as hybrid fiber coax. It does not opine on comparing fiber against any other forms of technology. So that's sort of important to keep in mind. And when we sort of talk a little more about why this study is so unique, we'll focus on this fact. Next slide, please, David. So where's the problem, right? And this picture, I think, sort of pinpoints that problem. There is a very large number of fiber unserved households. Given sort of the current status, about 40% are unserved. And of that, if you see, a majority of the unserved households are in non-urban census tracts, meaning rural and suburban census tracts. So if we are going to focus on rural America really getting the same kind of service as the rest of the country, deploying fiber is really important. And that's sort of where the gap is. Next slide, please, David. And speaking of sort of this gap, right? If you compare sort of the coverage by population density from like 2000, like June 2015 through 2023, you see that there's a very large rural and urban disparity, and that really has not gone away. In fact, it's broadened a bit. And therefore, it's important to really focus on this fiber deployment. Next slide, please, David. Also, a lot of times we're kind of fond of comparing ourselves with other countries to see how we are doing. This is one front that the US is lagging behind other countries, such as, South Korea, Singapore, China, and therefore, even from an international comparability standards, more needs to be done in the US in deploying fiber. Next slide, please. So why is our research different, right? Over the years, we've all seen research that talks about the benefits of high-speed broadband and how much value in terms of economic impact bringing high-speed broadband to any area can have. So this study is different because what we do is we run the thought experiment, which later translates to an econometric model that says, suppose you had high-speed broadband everywhere, but not fiber, and you brought fiber to those places. Would there be any impact there? Because that is the incremental value of fiber. It's not just another high-speed broadband technology. And that's why this paper is unique and makes a very valuable contribution to both sort of the general economics literature and also the policy literature regarding this. Next slide, please. So just to leave you sort of with the number, what the study shows is if fiber were deployed to all the 56 million fiber unserved households, we can expect somewhere around a $3.2 trillion impact in value. However, there are also a lot of other non-quantifiable benefits that we'll talk about later and go through what those are. So the question, of course, in front of us is, that's a huge value. So why isn't the private industry investing more in fiber and soaking up this value? And for that, I want to hand it over to Coleman to explain why there is underinvestment in fiber.
Thank you, Paroma. If you could go ahead to the next slide. So here I have to give us a short economics lesson. And Paroma and I would have to turn in our economics degrees if I didn't tell you that a well-working market can allocate resources most efficiently, and that we always defer to a well-working market. But there are times and places when markets don't work perfectly, and that's when information or benefits of the decisions of market participants aren't captured by those participants. Those are called externalities. In the case of fiber, what we're talking about is in the decision to deploy a network either to the next suburban community outside of a city or given a deployment to that community, how far that network should go. There will be a point at which the private investor will say, this is as profitable, this is all I can afford to invest in. And what an externality is to recognize that there may be benefits that the private investors are not considering when they make those investment decisions, and that government policy is then available to correct that market failure and create the incentives to have the investments go further. In a large sense, as Paroma just said, this is what's going on with subsidies around broadband in general, that there are externalities to having broadband, and so there is government programs to induce or incentivize broadband. When it comes to the extra benefits of fiber, that's where this paper focuses, and the current programs should take those into account. On the next slide, I will tell you a little bit about the types of externalities that that are going on here. So as I said, they're not fully captured by the private investment decisions, but what's the nature of the things that we're going to go on to measure? And it's useful to think of it in two ways. The first is that there is contemporaneous externalities. So if fiber is deployed in a market, you will have higher employment, you will have higher, as we'll see, some higher housing values and so forth. That might lead to, for as just one example, higher taxes. Those taxes are not something that the fiber deployment will capture, and so it's not in the calculus of where to build the network. It's those sorts of contemporaneous externalities that that are missing and that should be captured in the incentives of a government program. And fiber is unique in that it has, beyond the issue of there being benefits now, it's quite unique among broadband technologies in that it'll have significant benefits down the line, in that its infrastructure, the architecture of it is so flexible that whatever the developments in the fiber market are in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the fiber investments made today will be able to benefit from those in a way that won't have the technology lock-in that other technologies will have. And with that, I will turn it back to Proma.
Thank you, Coleman. Given sort of, the length of time we have, I am going to sort of speak a little fast and do sort of more overview, but happy to answer questions later. Next slide, please, David. So what are the areas where that goes into this $3.2 trillion, right? So it's roughly like half and half. We find that housing values, there the increase would be around like 1.6 trillion, and then sort of household income that also has another $1.6 trillion increase. If you come to think about it, what's behind that 1.6 trillion, although it looks like a large number, is something that's much more digestible. What we find is if you bring fiber to a census tract that has, say, coax, high-speed coax, but not fiber, median housing values will increase by around $29,000, which is about 14%. Like the median housing, average median housing value in the US is about $200,000, so about a 14% one-time increase, right? And where we get this $3.2 trillion is just simply, if you do give fiber to all the 56 million fiber unserved households today, you will see a $1.6 trillion impact. And the way it breaks down is it's about 1.4 trillion in rural areas and about like 242 billion in urban areas. Same thing for sort of income. The income effect, the $1.6 trillion can be broken down into an annual one. So if you think about what the annual value is, if you bring fiber, again, to a census tract that did not have fiber before but did have other high-speed wired technologies, each household will experience an income increase for about $1,450. So that's not like a huge amount. So it translates to about $81 billion. So when you actually bring it to each and every household, that's when you see the $81 billion of annual value. And in net present value, that translates to $1.6 trillion. So very significant impact. Are there other benefits that we have not quantified? Yes, but before that, the impact on jobs, it's about 380,000 jobs can be attributed to bringing fiber to places without fiber. Other things that we have not quantified that if I have time, I'll talk about a little more is fiber is also better environmentally than other technologies and has a 96% lower carbon footprint than HFC. It's long-lived, doesn't need to be replaced as often. And as I alluded to in my first slide, it's future-proof because it really forms the backbone of other communication technologies. Next slide, please, David. So I'm going to go through this really fast. Think about our experiment as when you have drug trials, right? You match people who are similar and both have, say, diabetes, and you give one group, like a random group, a diabetes drug and don't give the others, and you see what that treatment effect is. Very similar thing that we did here, only this is a natural experiment, right? So we have places where that did not have fiber, say, in our period of study. So, and then we saw in 2014, you don't have fiber. Then we see which places have high-speed internet, right? So that's our sample. No fiber, high-speed internet. And then we see out of that, which are the census tracts that actually received fiber in 2017 and 18. And then we just compare these two areas. So no fiber, but high-speed internet throughout our experiment period, and then one set is given fiber in 2017-18. What differences do we see in housing value and income? Next slide, please, David. So I think let me skip through the slides. We've talked about it. We can talk more during questions just to leave a little bit of time. So David, I think if we could shift to the second to last slide, which talks about, like slide 17, please. So these are sort of the other externalities that we talked about, you know, the jobs, the various environmental impacts, and also so the reduction in the carbon footprint and the remote work. So if you're interested, the paper also does sort of the effect of fiber on remote work and also a reduction in carbon footprint because of that. So with that, Coleman, do you want to wrap up with the policy conclusions?
Sure. If you just go to the last slide, I'll briefly just say, so we've measured these incremental benefits that are fiber specific, and any government program that's trying to right these market failures that's technology neutral will not appreciate the fact that the benefits that come from different technologies are not always neutral. And so the programs that are out there that nudge fiber deployments are doing the right thing because they are recognizing that there's incremental benefits there, and that's and we encourage the focus to continue. And I think with that, I'll stop and let Gary ask us some questions with our remaining time.
Well, yeah, this is great work and just a really interesting study. I guess the first of its kind. Coleman, can we start with externalities? I mean, so we see that, you know, while it seems like there's a lot of government subsidies, it's really 10 times more of that is private capex. And it looks like, you know, what we've seen is what spurred this huge capital investment on fiber from the private sector is competition. You know, just you want to make sure that every place is covered with fiber. And then it also looks like the private sector is able to leverage some unserved areas to help, you know, with the areas with more propensity to spend. But can you talk about the government factor? Is this a good investment from the government, and why?
Yes. So the benefits that flow back to society, whether it's through to the government directly through higher taxes, from higher income, from higher property values, or whether it's a sort of broader social benefit of, for example, the environmental benefits or being able to work remotely more effectively, are all benefits that that the return to the government investment is quite high from those perspectives. You're quite right, by the way, that most of this investment is private capital. So this is not about the government. This is not about a market that doesn't exist that you need to have the government come in and provide, like the military you might make that argument. Here, there is a vibrant market and a lot of investment in fiber, and this is about getting the deployment of that fiber as far out into the country as makes sense economically, meaning the value that society gets from the resources used to deploy it, you know, justify that investment. And these subsidies are just what are there to nudge the private capital in the right direction. And when it comes to fiber, that really means a little bit further out into the network, into areas that haven't been deployed yet.
Hey, Paroma, the government likes to use speed as a proxy for broadband. You know, we've seen things from 4:1 to 25:3 to 100 by 20 and so forth. But your study, it really, you're saying if you even have high-speed cable and you're getting gigabit service, the benefits you're seeing from fiber, this study is showing it how much benefit you get from other high-speed services, right? Can you explain that a little more?
Of course. Thanks, Gary. So this study is really sort of focusing on sort of the incremental benefit. So even if you thought that fiber and coax gave you exactly the same kind of speed in terms of the megabits per second, what our study is saying is fiber still has an incremental benefit controlling for the presence. So that's why this study is sort of unique in that sense. It's not just about speed. There's something about fiber, something about the future proofing, something about what else it brings to an economy that makes it different.
So, given that we just had administration change, or we're about to, um, the economic benefits, I mean, from your experience as economist, and this, the infrastructure bill was bipartisan. What is your view of what will happen going forward? Is this a good investment for whoever's in power?
Clearly, investing in getting infrastructure such as broadband and fiber more broadly is useful. The question about the new administration is, as we all know, I'll just say it, that there's very close to the satellite providers. And so the question is whether they overcorrect or bias toward one technology or another that doesn't have the same incremental benefits. I think fiber deployments, what this study shows is, even if in a world where you have a wide variety of broadband deployments, an increase in the amount of those deployments that are fiber are still going to be beneficial, kind of regardless of who's in charge.
And one of the audience questions says, what percentage of the 56 million U.S. households lacking fiber do you expect to be connected through BEAD, which BEAD targets about 8.8 million of the unserved or underserved. And then what we saw from the first state, Louisiana, is 96%. We expect that kind of from the east, and then the west when they have less money and lower density, larger landmass, it might be a little less than that. But what do you see in the long run of, the propensity, given that fiber is so creative, good economic benefits? What is your view of, from economists, on what we'll see over by the end of the decade?
From BEAD alone,
No, just in general, investment in general.
oh well, it's rolling out, and with the increased the competitive effects and the increased capacity, I think we're going to see that continue to go. The 56 million fiber unserved households. I don't know if we have the number of exactly how many of them are unserved by broadband at all, but that's obviously a much smaller part. And as you said, those programs will only address part of that. But the more of that 56 million that's covered, the more the bigger share of the benefits we've measured will realize.
And an audience question came in is, in your study on your income improvements with fiber, is that because of competition, or universally because of productivity increase by having fiber?
I think that's a great question. The econometric study really cannot answer it's causal, but it cannot answer through which channel it really increases. That would be another study, which we'd be happy to do. But for this study, we just measure the aggregate impact.
But the fact that we see it show up both in housing values and incomes and employment suggests that it's a mix of all of the above.
Well, this is fantastic work. Thank you guys for all your hard work on pulling this study together, one of its kind. And really appreciate your research and insight, as our industry works to build out our nation's critical broadband infrastructure for the future. And so thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. We're going to have our good friend Catherine DeWitt from the Broadband Access Initiative at the Pew Charitable Trust is going to discuss her latest research on state digital equity spending can benefit economies, healthcare, and education. So Catherine's always a wealth of information. Look forward to next Wednesday. And thanks again, Coleman Permar. We really appreciate your study.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you.